So, I don't know how up to this idea you are, Eric, but this episode was supposed to be... How old are you, Eric?
75.
Me interviewing a 75-year-old man.
3/4 of a century old.
3/4. The great generation, Eric is from.
Yeah, well, not quite.
It's not
I got in on the tail end of that. After it was, I lost any opportunity to do something great myself.
Well, the great generation.
By the great generation, you mean basically the one that fought and defeated fascism in World War II, and that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought the great generation didn't go to war.
No.
Yeah, they did.
No, the great well, Tom Brokaw is the one who came up with that term.
Uh-huh.
He wrote a book about it, about the greatest generation, and it was about the 30s and 40s, about the country pulling itself together after the Depression,
Defeating fascism. Who were the fascists back then?
The Nazis.
Oh, okay.
The Nazis, the Italian fascists, and Imperial Fascist Japan.
Yes. Well, what's interesting is, so you're a little off on the great generation. You're after, so you're a boomer.
Yeah, boomer.
Which, by the way, I hate when people use boomer as an insult. Like,
well, I didn't know they did.
Millennials and Gen Z. Oh, there's a meme called "Okay Boomer," and people make fun of Karens. You know.
Yeah.
Which I don't like Karens either, but my whole thing has always been respect your elders, treat them with respect, because they're from a better generation, and we're a bunch of spoiled idiots. We really are. You know?
I'll buy that.
You know, one thing I hate is, like, I'm from the 90s, and, like, back in the 90s we had, like, SpongeBob, Hey Arnold, Rugrats, you know, those cartoon shows, and everybody's like, yeah, Rugrats in the 90s and video games. I don't like that. I don't like any of it. I think it spoiled us, you know? We spent too much time indoors.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about your generation is, so my dad is like 60. So he was like a kid during the Beatles and like the 60s, but you were a teenager.
Yeah. Early teens.
That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because I used to think the 60s was awesome. I don't think it's awesome anymore.
Awesome in what way?
Well, like the acid and the free love.
The popular culture?
Yeah. Like, I don't know too much about it. Everything I know is from documentaries and books. But like, damn it, I lost my thought.
Oh, sorry though.
But
my
no,
fault.
It wasn't your fault. It was just me. So I used to think Jimi Hendrix was really cool. And now I look back, you remember the Jimi Hendrix album where it's like a cartoon him and elephants, Ganesh, the Hindu Ganesh?
I'm afraid not.
Just trippy psychedelic crap.
Yeah.
I really personally believe that the 60s, they call it the summer of love. I think that's when, like, music started to become satanic. People started to abandon Christian values that were very important.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
There was a rebellion that in the popular culture in the 1960s against all establishments, including the churches and religion.
Yeah.
And that petered out relatively quickly. The rebellion against religion. There was kind of within the counterculture movement of the 60s. There was sort of a counter Christian movement. The
Yes.
Jesus freaks, or whatever they call themselves.
And that lasted through the 70s and 80s.
And, well, in a sense, it's with us to this day.
See, that's where I would disagree, Eric. When we did an episode about how music is overtly satanic, and you claimed these pop stars did it for shock value, but I argued there's no one left to shock.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's true in the sense that we're all used to that stuff by now, but that isn't going to stop them from trying to shock us. That they have no choice. That's the only idea they have, is to shock us.
Well, Louis C.K. had a joke in his special last year, and he said, going to a church these days is like going to a bowling alley on a Tuesday afternoon. He's like, this used to be something. And I agree. The church doesn't have any power or sway. Children are being influenced to live a sinful life that's based on the self You know, the ego and the self and the self-obsession. And I don't think it's good. I hate my generation. My whole intro was going to revolve around this. So, there was a band called MGMT that was really popular around the time I graduated. And they had a song called The Youth. And the chorus was, "They're starting to change our youth." And one of the lines in the second verse is, "And despite all the weather, we'll learn to live and love together." I'm like, that sounds like climate change, you know? And in the music video, all the kids are, you know, whatever you call it, opposite gender. The boys had wigs. So the song was, they're starting to change our youth, and I believe they are. And you know me, Eric. I have a very bleak outlook on the future. I went to Starbucks and Walmart the other day because those are the only two stores that are open ever now. And I started just looking around at my... Let me just make sure. Okay. I started looking around at the young people. 28 years old, 20, 17. They were all pale, fat. I don't like making fun of fat people, but fat people. Pink hair.
Feel free to make fun of fat people. They disgust me too.
I have a soft spot for fat people because I grew up with overweight siblings, and I always felt very sorry for them. And they had pink hair, and they had their phones.
Yeah. It's just physically they're a mess. They've just completely let themselves go.
Yeah.
They have no standards. They just completely give in to self-indulgence. It's about self-indulgence.
And they have no like objective morality to live by.
No, I don't. That's true. I think they're rootless. There's no structure in their lives. They don't want any structure. And I don't know how they make it from day to day. Who are these kids? Everybody's got to have income.
They're entitled. They either work at Starbucks or office jobs. They work at vegan grocery stores or whatever. And
well, they are at least willing to work, I guess, insofar
they don't want.
They don't have any choice. I know, but
they're entitled, and if they turn in their boss for sexual harassment. So bosses are afraid to offend now. They're like, oh, I don't want to offend these young idiots. Because when you went to school, Eric, so this is going to be me interviewing you, Eric. Did they teach, oh, you're special, and your feelings could get hurt, and sticks and stones?
No, I don't remember anything like that.
Well, did you get beat, Eric?
Beat?
Yeah, like...
You mean bullied?
Beat by your parents, or physically bullied, beat? More
by my parents?
Yeah, were you disciplined physically?
Yeah, I was disciplined, yeah. Mom and Dad did not spare the rod.
The rod?
Well, not
or
literally.
The belt?
The belt, or,
What's your thoughts on that? Do you think we should go back to that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I know it is certainly, it's fallen out of fashion. Mm-hmm. And even on some of these websites I look at that I find very interesting and informative, and I agree with most of what they say. They say any parent who finds it necessary to beat their kids is a bad parent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree. You know, like anything, you can take corporal punishment to a completely unnecessary extreme.
Yes.
You know, that's a big thing in certain fundamentalist Christian subcultures.
To
beat your kids.
Or spank them.
At least spank them.
Mm-hmm.
And in some, and also, well, I don't want to get too wrapped up on that. I don't know, because I don't know how extensive this practice is, even within the Christian community. But they do talk about, you know, some of these spiritual leaders, these Christian spiritual leaders of that sect of Christianity, write books about this. Mm-hmm. Write books about how great it is to beat your kids.
Well, here's the thing: is when I was little, I was very hyper. Like if I drank sugar, because maybe I have ADHD or whatever, and I would run around like a little rascal. Like my grandma thought I was a demon. I was worse than my brother and sister, And if I got too out of line, I would get spanked and hit.
Yeah.
And it did correct me. Like,
yeah. So what are you saying? So you think we should bring the rod back?
Well, I was watching Boardwalk Empire recently, which takes place in the 20s, and I know that it's a show, but like, they would get beatings from their father, and they seemed to be more disciplined, and they kind of fell in line. Yeah. You know, like they didn't act out. I don't know.
I don't know enough about it to say it's just a bad thing across the board. Maybe it is necessary. Mm-hmm. Maybe kids need to. I don't know if that. Again, you can take that to an unnecessary and even seemingly sadistic extreme, which is what I'm hearing about in these Christian communities. They're over disciplining their kids, and the kids that you're referring to, the fat kids with the pink hair,
yes,
they're not being disciplined enough, obviously.
Well, nowadays people are having kids and it's genderless until it's 3 because they want a 3-year-old to decide it. So I think that it's like that quote, and like hard times create strong men create good times create weak men. And now millennials are weak, but we do have a certain roughness to us, you know, like there was definitely bullying. I was a bully when I was a kid.
You were a bully?
I was a short kid. I was always the shortest kid, so I had to learn to trick people with my mind because I wasn't strong. I was a little weakling. Still am. But, so, Eric, you're from after the Great Generation. I wanted to make a point that I went to Walmart the other day. I saw all these pale, fat, pink-haired kids. Identity politics has taken over politics. Like, stuff that you and I talk about is dampened by, oh, are you a homophobe? Yeah. And I'm so sick of it. So I thought this episode I would interview Eric, who is a boomer. And when you were a teenager, that was right around the time of the Summer of Love, 60s.
Yeah.
So the first thing, let's bring this up, because this is very obvious. I go on Reddit sometimes, and I follow Reddit r Christianity. And it's an open forum to talk about being a Christian. A lot of people troll that subreddit, and they're very angry. They're very angry atheists. And when you click on their profiles, they all have one thing in common. Strict, fundamentalist Christian upbringing.
Mm.
And Eric was a victim of that.
Yes, I was.
So just what was that like? So when you were a young man?
Well, it was certainly very structured. You can count on that. Yeah, Mom and Dad were devout Missouri Synod Lutherans, and nobody takes their Lutheranism more seriously than Missouri Synod Lutherans for some reason. I don't know if that's still true. I mean, they weren't cold. They were very loving, but we were. I looking back on it. In fact, at the time, I felt, hey, come on, this is a little over-structured. They tried to, Mom especially, she micromanaged our lives, and she was. I'm not sure if Dad was all that religious. Sometimes I wondered if he was just going through the motions to please her. Mm-hmm. But he was certainly willing to go through the motions, and she was like a borderline fanatic.
So was this when you were ages 5 to 8 or 10 to 15?
Virtually from birth,
the
lad.
Whole time.
Yeah.
So when you say strict, like, did you have to wake up early, read the Bible?
Well, we didn't. Yes. In effect, there were throughout the week and throughout the month and the year on the Christian calendar. When I was in the Christian community that I grew up in, there were things that you did, and in addition to church and Sunday school, of course, there was some summer vacation Bible schools and family evening devotions.
Really?
And there was our church found some reason or other to have a church service in the middle of the week on Wednesday evenings. I remember that was the night Disneyland came on TV, and that was very upsetting to us. But tough shit, you know.
And when you used to watch TV, go on.
Well, yeah. Well, the point is that yes, I think they overdid it. And it worked until I was about 18, by which time I got out of house and started thinking for myself. If you want
'Cause you
to
went
come
to
back to
college.
that, yeah.
So before your great awakening and your departure from Christianity, 14-year-old Eric, when you were forced to do your weekly Bible in the middle of the week thing, did you buy it? Were you
Oh yeah.
devout?
Oh yeah. I mean that was the culture that I was a part of. There were no alternatives. The only atheist any of us had ever heard of was Madeline Murray O'Hare and Karl Marx,
Oh yeah.
the communists and people like that. And no, we didn't want any part of that. There was no opportunity. I would go so far as to say that we were actively discouraged from thinking for ourselves
Yes.
and thinking critically about anything.
So along with, studying the Bible, did you have to live a strict life where you couldn't watch certain TV shows and you couldn't listen to this music?
Well, the TV shows back in those days, there was nothing on them that was all that objectionable.
Yeah.
Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, did you watch Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. What made you think of that?
Well, just because it was 60s,
Yeah.
So when the Beatles got popular, you were what, how old?
Oh,
9.
well, by then I was about 17.
So when
17.
you listened to the 60s British invasion hippie stuff, were your parents so strict that you couldn't really do that? And
Well, by that time, I was out of the house.
you were out of the house.
Now, I remember when I was still living at home when the Beatles first gained prominence in the culture, and Mom, later Dad told me that he actually liked the Beatles, and I don't think Mom didn't approve of them, but she just thought they were silly, and she thought the way they wore their hair was kind of silly and androgynous.
Well, the reason I bring this up is because I always bring up the Beatles because I'm a big Beatles fan. But during the 60s, so I want to make this point. Before the Beatles and the doo-wop, it seems like music was like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and that music seemed to target the elderly, the older people.
Well, it seems that way now because that the generation that tuned into them when they were teenagers were the generation that preceded mine.
So it seems like it was probably the youth listening to Frank Sinatra, but the music. Frank Sinatra's music seems like it was targeted towards people in their 40s that had good careers and went out to fancy
Well,
dinners.
it was. If anybody's, I don't know of anybody certainly not in your generation. I don't think even in my generation nobody listened to Frank Sinatra.
But do you agree that around the 50s and 60s, I could imagine the old white men that were in power were like, oh, the young is getting over on us. The young are starting to have a big voice. Especially with the 1968 Democrat convention, that standoff between the cops.
Yeah.
If you watch the show Mad Men, it seems like the older people were really upset that the young were starting to have the voices with the feminist women movement and civil rights and free love and the hippies. So really, it did seem like pre-1950, the older had a grip on everything, music, church, blah blah blah. And then when you came of age, it started to be, the younger, the beatniks, the Jack Kerouacs. You know what I mean?
Well, the Jack Kerouacs were preceded my time. They were the beatniks, what they used to call the beatniks, that was the subculture, the bohemian subculture that we first learned of in America, and people were fascinated by the Beats. Everybody made fun of the Beats, but everybody was fascinated by them because of the things that they associated with them, including free love and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Everybody made fun of them, but everybody kind of envied them because they felt that these guys had some freedoms social freedoms that everybody else lacked. Anyway, the hippie movement evolved from the beat movement.
Yeah. So
and some of the heroes of the earlier heroes of the hippie movement had been beats.
So I didn't know this, but so it went like this in the 1920s and 30s and whatever. It was bohemians, which turned into the beatniks.
Yeah.
And the beatniks turned into the
Hippies. Yeah.
So the bohemians of like the 20s and 30s. See, if you look at it from a religious perspective, what were the bohemians? The bohemians were very into art.
Yeah.
That was when like I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. I gotta keep this one strict to the. So Eric, despite the fact, Eric, you had a strict religious upbringing. When you were younger, you bought into the Christianity, but once you left for college, you started to explore different atheist attitudes that were going around in the late 60s.
Yes, they were. That was quite fashionable, and yeah, it was. My freshman year in college, I was sent to a parochial Lutheran college in South Texas.
Oh God!
Yeah, but I transferred to the University of Texas at Austin, and that was a very exciting,
very
stimulating.
Democrat.
Well,
right.
Yeah, it was very progressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean it had the powerful. I don't remember there being a powerful, liberal establishment in the politics of Austin. Well, there still isn't. There is in the municipal structure of Austin, Texas. It's quite liberal, but of course that's the state capital. Austin is the capital of Texas, and most of certainly the state legislature and the governorship is dominated by super conservatives, as you must know. But back then, there were everybody. Everybody in positions of political power, municipal and state, were very conservative, and they were strongly disapproving of hippies and the students for the Democratic Society and that sort of thing.
Austin is a very big music place, right?
Yeah, big music place. They have big festivals.
Anywhere music and art goes, liberalism follows. Doesn't that seem true?
I guess you could. Sure, they go hand in hand. Musicians, people who gravitate toward the creative and performing arts, tend to be liberal in their thought.
You know why
It's not necessarily because one subculture influences the other. I think it has more to do with the kind of mindset that people have, who choose the creative arts to gravitate toward, and it's just something. And some people people's brains are wired differently. Some people are more amenable to progressive modes of thought.
Yes.
And they're more tolerant of non-conventional ways of thinking and so on. So.
And another thing is, say you're a young artist, you go out to nightclubs to play your music, and that's kind of where the dregs of society of all different lifestyles kind of all come together. And the big stuffy conservatives are too busy with their jobs and their career. But so you graduate. But would you still say that your parents treated you with respect? You still respected your parents with their Christian beliefs, or did you feel kind of a disconnect, separation?
Well, there was a disconnect when I lost my religious faith, which happened in my sophomore year at the University of Texas. And I withheld that from them.
Yes.
Throughout, I finished school and I joined the Marine Corps.
So when you called your parents, you would go, "Amen, God bless, have a good one," cross your fingers.
I don't see how Mom could have failed to notice that I was a different person in some ways. That I simply was not taking religion as seriously as I used to, or as she thought I should. And I remember, I came home from, leave from the Marines. And this was the first time I came home after I had gotten my commission as a lieutenant. So I came home in full uniform, and they were so proud of me. But we were in the pews, and it was communion. They were going to be serving communion that day.
And this was right around the Vietnam War.
Yeah. This would have been 1969. 69, 70.
Oh, that's when it was getting crazy. That's when the anti-war movement really started, right? Around 68.
Oh, yeah. Well, it had started somewhat earlier than that. It started right around 65, 66, I would say.
So what made you make that decision? So you decided to go into the Marines. You didn't have to, but did you do it because of like a sense of duty and patriotism?
Yes. Mom I come from very patriotic stock. Mom and Dad was in the Army Air Corps, and he regrets leaving it because that was and I was happy to do it. I felt that I owed something to my country because my country had been pretty good to me.
Well, what's interesting, so you joined in 69. So that's when, like, the John Lennon, war is over if you want it. So were you not buying into that anti-war rhetoric?
Well, not at first. When I started out, when I left home and started school, I was very much in favor of the Vietnam War. I actually thought it was worth prosecuting. Mm-hmm. But then, little by little, it became increasingly clear to me that it was a huge mistake, that we couldn't win, and that if anything, we were on the wrong side.
Yes.
There's some complicated history there, but we were on the wrong fucking side.
Well, wasn't it the Gulf of Tonkin?
Yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Everybody started. So it went from I'm patriotic, we need to win this war, to this war is a lie.
This war is a lie.
So you were already in the Marines when that happened? You passed Marine boot camp, correct?
Well, officer candidate school is what it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. One of my friends graduated from college. He joined the Navy. He went to officer candidate school. And from what I gathered, so if you just join the Marines and you go through boot camp, when you graduate boot camp, you're essentially the smallest, lowest. But when you become an officer candidate, you kind of pass boot camp and you're in a position of power.
Well, officer candidate school is like boot camp. It is boot camp, except it's geared toward officers, potential officers.
So when you pass or graduate, you're not at the bottom.
No, you're at the bottom of the commissioned officer structure.
Okay.
Lieutenancy is at the very bottom of that, but you outrank all enlisted personnel. Hell, you even outranked sergeant majors, or
really?
sergeants major as it's properly termed. Yeah, and sergeant majors had nothing but contempt for lieutenants, but we technically outranked them, and so they had to salute us. They didn't have to call us sir. I remember when I saw a sergeant major coming, I go, whoa, that was an awesome rank. But
yes.
we still outranked them.
So did you adapt well to that heavily disciplined
lifestyle?
No,
I did not. I didn't expect to. I mean, it was. I'm afraid I'm a bohemian at heart.
Yes.
And I've never felt extremely comfortable being part of an organization of any kind. And you can't get much more organized than the Marine Corps.
Yes.
But I thought, for that very reason too, that would be a good experience for me.
Yes.
Which it was.
It knocked.
I wouldn't want to go through that again, but it was. I don't regret it for a minute. It was.
Well, do you think that joining the Marines kind of knocked that free spirit out of you?
No.
Or you kept it?
I kept it. Yeah. And I expressed it pretty freely when I was in the Corps.
Well, you know what's interesting about the military is undoubtedly it does change you. It conditions your mind. It kind of breaks you down, and it kind of you're reborn. Essentially, correct?
Well, yeah, I guess it doesn't. Well, there's a number of different ways that one can express what I think you're trying to express there. Mm-hmm. The common assumption about what the military does is they break you down, and the military itself says that's what they do. They break you down, whatever that means,
yes.
And then they build you back up.
Exactly.
And by the time you're finished, I don't know how true this is of the other branches, but when you come out of the Marines, out of boot camp or officer candidate, you feel like you can devour the world.
Yes.
You got spirit. I was a bohemian, and I had Marine Corps spirit.
That's awesome.
I was jazzed.
Well, here's and I'm not calling the military a cult by any means, but I watched a video about when you join a cult or a fraternity or the military, they have to do that. They have to break you down. They have to kind of it is in a sense brainwashing by trauma. It has to be trauma based. Military is traumatic. Boot camp is traumatic.
Well, and there's a good reason for that. War is traumatic.
Yes.
And you got to be able to function under pressure is the basic idea there.
Mm-hmm.
So they make things as difficult as possible for you when you're going through, and it's partly to get you used. It's shock treatment to get you adjusted to the command structure.
Yes.
Now, you're part of a structure. You obey orders without question.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be able to do what you have to do while bullets are flying.
Yes.
Okay, so it makes perfect sense. It's not sheer maliciousness. It's not like you don't really have that kind of thing is not really necessary to join, say, a fraternity.
That's true.
That's just sheer harassment for the sake of harassment.
Well, another thing is the reason the military likes young people, well, one, they're physically very fit and active, but also they have no sense of their own mortality.
Right.
Like, you remember being young, like speeding, you don't think you're going to die, you know? It wasn't until I was about 26 that I started really being like, oh, like, don't speed, man. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, help me understand something, Eric. I'm trying to be like Howard Stern. Howard Stern was a great interviewer. So, you go from a strict religious upbringing to college. College is free spirits, free loves, Democrats, liberalism. And then how long were you in college until you went into the military? You completed college directly into the military. But they never shipped you off to war.
I volunteered.
You volunteered, and they still didn't do it.
I volunteered for Vietnam, and I didn't get sent.
Do you regret that?
How's that for an irony? Well,
would you have preferred it if you went to war? Because then you would have had to kill a guy.
Well,
That's crazy to think about, ain't it?
It is. It's particularly crazy when you reflect upon the fact that by that time, I was quite fiercely against the war.
Yeah.
I could see it was a disaster, and it was a moral, historical, and ethical failure on our part not to recognize the longing of the Vietnamese people to live in their own country. They'd just thrown off the French.
Yes.
Vietnam was a French colony, and so was Laos and Cambodia, and Ho Chi Minh. He originally came to us, to the United States, after World War One.
Was he the Vietnamese leader guy?
Yeah, he was. Okay. Yeah, the famous president of communist leader of North Vietnam. What America, one of the numerous things that America just never could come to terms with was that Ho Chi Minh wasn't really a communist in the sense that he bought wholly into the communist ideology. Mm-hmm. He was a nationalist. And the reason that he became a communist is because we rebuffed him. We wouldn't help him get rid of the French because the French were our allies. Uh-huh. So he turned to the communists. The Russians and the Chinese offered to help him. They did help him. So he declared for communism. It's not because he believed in the ideology. He was a nationalist.
He was like Tarzan swinging from vine to vine.
He was like Braveheart or something. Yeah. He was fighting for the independence and freedom of his people. So,
how long were you technically in the military? Because you didn't go to war, so you passed boot camp.
Yeah.
So how long was it?
For about four to 4.5 years, something like that.
And you volunteered for war. They didn't send you. Why do you think that is? Maybe they
Why didn't they send me?
Maybe they thought this guy Eric, he's like kind of an intellectual. We need his mind.
Well, the people who approved or disapproved your first choice of a duty station were not people who you personally met. You may have gotten some kind of recommendation from somebody who was directly over you, but it went up the line, up the chain of command to somebody. I don't know how those decisions were made. It was sort of like, as to why did I want to go to Vietnam even though I strongly disapproved of it and didn't believe it anymore? Well, for the adventure. I wanted the experience of combat.
Well, you know what I think is interesting is a lot of young men who join the military, age 17, 18, like J.D. Salinger, I think in his mind, so J.D. Salinger, he was in World War II.
Yeah.
He was probably reading patriotic books and, America, they use propaganda to get people to want to go to war and defend their country.
Yeah.
But once they get there, I think they realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. Like, I have to kill people who I'm invading their country. Like, I'm sure a lot of people were in Vietnam, and Vietnam was one hell of a war, right? Like,
it was insane. It was just like an apocalypse now.
Like tunnel rats, tunnel rats?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, tunnel rats, they used to have tunnels in the ground of Vietnam, and they would send soldiers in, and they would be crawling through the tunnels, and they would just explode underground.
Yeah.
What a traumatic way to die.
Yeah, indeed.
Claustrophobia and explosions.
I could not have handled that kind of duty. I don't know if we actually did that. I know the Vietnamese did, but tunneling is an old military tactic.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to at least to the maybe all the way to the Rome. Oh hell, back to the Bronze Age. There were tunnel rats in militaries, and that wouldn't have been for me. I'm horribly claustrophobic. I don't know what I would have done if I had been faced with an order like that.
Well, would you agree with this? This is from what I've heard from watching documentaries about soldiers. They're young, they go to war, and they're constantly afraid they're going to die. They're going to step on a landmine or get shot. They kill their first guy, and they probably feel guilt, like, oh, I just killed a man. But after the being in the trenches and the rain, they stop caring. They just kill. They turn into killing machines.
Yep, they turn a little soulless. I'm sure that I know that does happen. I could not speak to how pervasively it happens. I don't, because I never experienced it. But
So-
my sense of what Vietnam was like came from Apocalypse Now, basically,
movie, yeah.
which was just it was fucking surreal.
So let's move on from we got the military. We touched on the young Eric, the college Eric. What did you do after the military? What was your plan? You had all this. So one, you graduated from college, so you were one step ahead. Also, you had military background.
Yeah. Plus, I was an officer. That looks good on your resume.
Very
so.
disciplined.
Yeah.
What did you want to be, or did you not know?
I did not know.
How old were you? Probably 24?
Yeah, about that. Yeah,
Mhm.
25, 26 maybe.
Was it, because Eric is a writer, at this point in your life, were you already pursuing that?
Yes, I was.
Mhm.
I saw myself as a future writer, and I had such confidence in my ability that for me, I thought whatever jobs, I tried to get decent jobs,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought whatever jobs I get were just, transitory
Yes.
to making my mark as a writer.
Who were your idols and inspirations?
As far as writing goes?
As far as anybody,
Oh.
who influenced you back then? Because every young person has their heroes. You
Yeah.
know? Who are your heroes? I'm always interested to hear that.
Oh boy, that's I most of my heroes they weren't really people who were contemporaneous with me. I don't know of very many, famous people, movie
Famous
stars,
authors,
or
maybe?
politicians, or even authors. I mean, there were some authors I admired. I admired Ken Kesey.
Ken Kesey.
I still think the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest could be the great American novel.
Yeah.
So I admired, and I liked him too, from what I knew about him personally. And
He was real into psychedelic drugs.
yeah,
right?
he was one of the progenitors of the hippie movement.
Well, he was in the Merry Pranksters.
Right. Well, he founded the Merry Pranksters.
Mm-hmm.
So people like that. Most of my heroes come from past eras. Like I think the biggest hero of all time for me was a famous well, he was famous in his own lifetime, a British explorer named Sir Richard Francis Burton. You ever hear of him?
I think you've mentioned him though.
I probably have. Yeah, he was an explorer. He was an adventurer of many different kinds.
During what generation?
During the Victorian era.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he goes back that far, and he was just an amazing character. He was one of the geniuses of his age, a brilliant man. He spoke 7 or 8 languages fluently. He was particularly drawn to the Arabic culture, and he spoke Arabic fluently, and so fluently that he could actually penetrate the Kaaba during this big what is it, the big festival that takes place in
Ramadan.
No, Saudi Arabia, where it's this can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this. It's this trip that every good Muslim is obliged to make at least once in their life to this big sacred shrine in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, no non-Muslim, in fact, that has ever been known except for Richard Burton. He disguised himself as an Arab, spoke fluent, and he penetrated this ceremony and went right inside this Kaaba, this big cube in the center of the square, so forth. This guy was an amazing character.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Your idol was an explorer.
An explorer. Well, he wasn't just. He was a real latter-day Renaissance man. He was an explorer, an ethnologist, a linguist.
God, his Wikipedia is huge. It's like his Wikipedia. I just looked it up. It's like
you
this
did?
long. It's huge.
Are you sure you've got the eminent Victorian explorer there, or the actor?
No, it's definitely the explorer.
Okay, yeah. You got a picture of him there?
Oh wait, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to knock the camera.
Yeah,
over.
sorry.
Is it that?
Sorry. No, you can check it out.
Okay. Is that the actor?
That's the actor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're going to get a lot of hits about that.
So that's interesting. I would assume that a young man during that time would be their heroes would be maybe John Lennon or an actor.
Oh no.
Eric said, "Screw that."
There was an actor. Burt Lancaster was a hero of mine because he first really came to my attention in the swashbuckler he was in 1952 called The Crimson Pirate, which is almost forgotten now. But it was a very good film in a lot of respects. But it was a showcase for Lancaster's just almost superhuman athletic ability. This guy was he was an acrobat.
So since you looked up to this explorer fella, did that make you want to be an explorer?
It made me want to be an explorer. You bet.
Did they have it? Like, I always thought explorers died out in like the 1700s.
Well, they pretty much did. I mean, there's not much left to explore. The Earth is explored. You know, one of the big deals during Burton's time was discovering the source of the Nile River. And that was in the West, throughout Europe. People were obsessed with this, and Burton led one of the expeditions to try to find the source of the Nile, which turned out to be Lake Tanganyika. But he, of course, which is pretty far south, and actually he never found it.
Never found it.
He was his partner. Burton, who was seemingly indestructible. He was just this incredibly powerful physical specimen too. He was a boxer and a swordsman, an athlete, all-around athlete. But he got sick, and yellow fever or malaria or something, and his partner had to leave him behind. His partner went and discovered the source of the Nile. So that was, I guess, that was Burton's greatest disappointment in life, that he couldn't have been. But anyway, that's what people did in those days, and there are no more discoveries of that caliber to be made anymore.
That's
as far as I know.
Unless you want to find indigenous tribes or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think probably we're aware of all indigenous tribes everywhere they are. We have more of an ethic now of leaving them be, which I think
Bill
we should.
Gates is trying to vaccinate them for their safety now.
Oh,
He should
really?
leave them alone. So
yeah, I did hear something about somebody wanted to go in and vaccinate him. I didn't hear about Bill Gates, but that was being objected to by some people who said, "Nah, just leave him alone." Yeah.
I really think what we should do, it seems like the world is turning into this dystopian nightmare. They should take a country, like a big island, and let people like me, the free folk, they should let us be. We should go live on an island, like an anarchist island, That'd be really cool. Just like, hey, we're going to brainwash the rest of the world, but you guys can have your country island. I really think we should go back to being Amish, really. I think technology is going to turn on us, and it already is. It's starting to. But anyway, that's for another episode.
Yeah.
So Eric, you leave college, join the military, but for some reason they don't send you to war.
Must have been Catch-22. In
Yes.
Catch-22,
The book, yeah.
if you're crazy enough to volunteer for combat, you aren't fit to go.
That could be. So you get out of the military, all of a sudden you have to face the adult world.
The real world.
What was your entrance into the labor world, the work?
Well,
I think you've had a bunch of jobs, right?
I started getting jobs, and like you, I couldn't hold down a job for very long.
Yes.
I disliked every job I ever had.
It's a problem I've noticed. Creative people, it's a problem for them. So, what job did you hate the most? What job did you like the most? And were you making good money?
All of that varied by quite a bit. I guess the worst job I ever had was I worked in a thrift and loan office for a while. I spent most of my day on the phone talking to flakes.
Oh God.
Trying to get them to pay up, trying to locate them first of all, and then trying to get them to pay up.
Oh wow.
And sometimes frequently I'd go out in the field and try to hunt them down.
That's interesting.
Geographically, yeah.
That's like being a private investigator.
Sort of, sort of like being a private, and not quite as glamorous, but...
So did your personality adapt to that position?
No.
Maybe you had too big of a heart? Like, these poor people,
I had a little too big of a heart in the military. I wasn't as tough on my men as I probably should have been. I was an infantry platoon commander. I started out as an infantry platoon commander, and I empathized with my men a little bit too much because that was a real tough time to be in the military because the entire U.S. military was suffering from the Vietnam syndrome.
And Americans didn't like the soldiers, right?
Right. Yeah, the soldiers. Yeah. Oh, it did. Soldiers came home from anywhere, but especially from Vietnam, and they were spat on.
Getting screamed at by hippies.
Yeah.
Liberal hippies.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
so you had a soft spot for the men under you, and then when you enter the working world, how long did you keep that job where you had to hunt down flakes?
Oh, I don't know, a couple of years, maybe.
So, what job did you hate the most?
Well, I think that was it. That job I hated the most.
What job did you keep the longest?
Oh, well, that probably would have been that last job I had in Colorado, the ATM field technician. I did that for 10 years.
Weren't you a pianist?
Yes, off and on, depending on whether I had access to a piano.
So were you able to play like complex Mozart, Beethoven?
Yeah. I concentrated on. There was a lot of classical music in our house when I was a kid, and that rubbed off on me. I played a lot of classical stuff.
Which also, since you're such a classical music fan, you never really respected the pop music and the Beatles.
Oh,
right?
Not as. Yes and no. I mean, pop music is... I never fully respected classical, for that matter, because, I've listened to a lot of classical music, and I would say out of all the stuff I listened to, only 30% of it or so was worth my time.
Well, you know what's interesting is that there's a new... I told you this on the podcast before. What was that? Mozart and Beethoven, they were prodigies.
Yeah.
There's a new prodigy, some girl named Alma, and... she talks about classical music, and she would say classical music has to tell a story, So if a classical piece is like 30 minutes, whatever, 40 hours, however long it is, it's got little divots and ups and downs and tells a story. That's interesting to me. Would you?
Well, it doesn't have to tell a story. A lot of them did, especially, I think I recommended something to you once that you didn't like, as I recall.
To me, it's all the same. Like, classical. I do like classical, though. I like Beethoven a lot.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
I don't like very... I think they're like five, maybe six compositions by Beethoven that I really like. The rest is crap.
Well, didn't everybody make fun of Beethoven's final piece?
Well, it is kind of an object of I don't know if ridicule is the right word. It has suffered from overexposure because they use it in commercials a lot and that kind of thing. I think
it's great.
Oh, it is. That's a great piece. Did you know that Beethoven was completely deaf when he composed that?
Oh yeah.
That was his masterpiece. His longest work. It was a symphony with 4 movements long, with a chorus, a chorale.
I had a teacher.
Poor Slav never heard a note of it except in his mind.
I heard.
Man, that's genius.
A teacher said that Beethoven was like a rock star. Like rock stars wreck hotels. Like Beethoven would pace around and just write on his walls.
Oh, he was psycho.
He was crazy.
Well, they exhumed him some years not too long ago and found traces of mercury poisoning in his skull.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I don't know what caused that, but he was very erratic, a very erratic personality.
I remember being a kid and I loved that
it's a great tune.
It's Joy. That sounds like joy.
It's what it's called, the Ode to Joy.
The Ode to Joy, yeah. So Eric, one thing I've never heard too much about was your kind of like your family life. You had a wife, you had kids, and all that.
What?
You had the wife and kids and stuff.
Not me.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Oh, okay.
I've never married.
Oh, okay. See, that's why you and I are alike, Eric, because I don't think I'm ever going to marry.
What's the point?
Yeah, exactly. All I want to do in life is chase my creative endeavors.
Right.
And that's when did you begin to attempt to be a writer and then eventually become a writer?
I was dabbling in that when I was a child.
Really?
Yeah, I remember writing mostly science fiction. I was really into science fiction when I was a kid.
You know what you should do? Eric, by the way, has a book, and it's very well written. You use a lot of big words, and I just remember because I didn't read the whole thing because I didn't have the book. I had to read it on my computer, and I hate reading from a computer.
Yeah, I do too.
But I remember at the beginning you had a scene where 2 guys meet at like a airport cafeteria in your book. And it was it flowed very nicely. It was like, you know what I mean? You know what you should do? You should narrate your audiobook and then put it on YouTube. Or I'll narrate it for you. That'd be cool.
Huh. Well, that never occurred to me.
Yeah. So
you think that might be a path to success there?
It could be. People love listening.
By the way, that outfit that it published it, or it was an electronic publishing house of some kind, and what they just you submitted manuscripts to them, and I don't think the only real criteria, it was called Smashwords, and the only criterion that they demanded was that it be properly formatted. If your book was properly formatted, it got posted on Facebook. You had to come up with a cover illustration for the
So did you draw one?
No, I put one together I made a collage or something, a couple different photographs that seemed relative to the subject. And
so your book is technically published.
It's technically published if you consider that being published. However, it turns out that the Smashwords central office, our only office, is just a couple of blocks away from where my friend Mike lives in Los Gatos, California. And we went back there and we stopped by to see what was going on there because they essentially shut down during the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
And then, but we got there, it was gone.
Really?
Yeah, no forwarding address. I keep meaning to find out what actually happened to him. I don't know if you can still even upload books from it.
So, if you have an iPhone, you get applications or software from the iTunes store, and when you have an Android phone like me, you get it from the Google Play Store. If I typed in your book into the stratosphere to find books, ebooks, you think I'd be able to find it?
I don't know.
What is it called? What's the name?
It's called American Saints.
American Saints. Very cool.
And it's by I used a nom de plume, not my real name. So I can. It's the. Well, if you go look for it, you're probably going to need the title and the author name. Yeah, I think I would appreciate it if you would make the attempt. If you're,
I'll try to find it.
I mean, I could have done that too. Yeah, I mean, just if nothing else, find out if it's still there, it's still downloadable.
Yeah.
In some form.
How do you feel about your book, American Saints? Are you proud of it, or
I'm very proud of it. There are some parts of it that I think hold up better than others. There's some parts that I indulged a bit of paranoid fantasy in one part of it there toward the. I don't know if it worked. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I had a lot of fun writing it, but it compared to the rest of the book, it seemed a little bit kind of a departure in style and outlook. It was almost surreal, a little surreal.
Did you pants your book? You know the term pantsing it?
No.
Stephen King, I think he coined the term. When you pants a book is when you know the general outline, but you write it as you go.
Yeah, that's what I did.
That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I had a very general idea of what I wanted to write about, and I just started writing, and it took me here, it took me there, and
cool.
I think it all came together quite well.
Well, I'm trying to write a book now, so I got the first chapter or two done. But one thing I noticed is, so it's about like high school kids. And when I first started writing it, the protagonist, he was just kind of a boring, dull high school kid. They call them bathroom signs, bathroom symbols, because they're just like a bathroom, the men's bathroom. They're just blank and empty. I thought that was really boring, so I made him a sociopath. Like, he's just a bad person. He steals and doesn't care. He doesn't have empathy.
Well, he's what they used to call an anti-hero.
Exactly. That's more interesting to write. But anyway, this isn't a me episode. So so we got through the school, the military, your creative endeavor as a writer. Looking back, Eric, do you have any regrets, and do you feel fulfilled? You lived an interesting life. I got to give you that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a lot of regrets, but
writing a book is not an easy feat. It's very difficult.
Well, it's probably easier for some people than others, and it must be easy for Stephen King. Jesus Christ, that guy must have written 1,000 books by now.
Well,
I don't know.
When you get the idea for a book, it's so abstract. You're like, well, I have a character and this idea, and that to get through writing it, because the hardest part as a writer, say you write a chapter quickly, you become OCD about it. You want to go back and change it.
Yeah. Well,
that's the hardest part.
That's not that hard for me. In fact, that's something I do almost obsessively. Is I keep going back over the two books the one book that I finished and one that I expect to finish. In both cases, I just went back and just went through it again and again, polishing it up, or so I believed, and it was, and I actually had a lot of fun writing both books. I'm having the time of my life writing this one I'm writing now.
And that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
you're working on something now?
Yeah.
Is it fiction or non-fiction?
Non-fiction.
Oh, okay.
And it's but I think I'm drawing that process out because I dread the next step in the process, which is trying to sell it to a publisher. I have been through that before, and it's a nightmare.
Is this book called Welcome to Hell?
See You in Hell.
See You in Hell.
See You in Hell. How did you know about that?
Just because, so let me go into how you and I met. And I'll tell you why I know it. So Eric, when you moved into the house, my first impression of you. So you ever hear that, like, when people go to prison on their first day, they walk into the yard and they gotta be tough?
Yeah, yeah.
That I got the impression that you were a nice guy, but you were acting kind of like a dick because you didn't want to be messed with. And I saw right through it, Eric. For, you know, like, you looked really grumpy, and we were helping bring in furniture, and you were just kind of, like, very short with us. Yeah, put it over there, you know. But then...
Boy, I don't remember that.
Well, eventually, you know, baby boomers, when they have computer problems, they think that every young person is a computer whiz.
Well, that's what I thought.
Well, you would ask me to help fix your computer, and I always obliged. I always wanted to help.
Yeah.
And I think I would I'd be like, oh, he's writing a book. Like, See You in Hell, or whatever.
Oh,
Welcome to Hell.
Oh.
And you had a Jack Kerouac poster. We bonded over that. And we would run into each other, and we would talk for, like, a long time every time we would do that. So that's how we met. And, that's why I wanted to say that, but, how do I segue out of this? I don't know how to segue out of it. So, you're being interviewed, Eric. How about, and we'll wrap it up soon. What do you want to tell the audience that we have? Like, what's your message for the youth? What are you disappointed in how America's going right now?
I am horrified by how America is going now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, and there's so many who to blame for this. There's so many blameworthy persons and individuals and entities that are just bringing America to ruin. I still blame it mostly on Trump. Yes, Donald Trump. He unleashed something or brought something out of the shadows that would have been better left in the shadows. America's worst element, I think, outside of the outright criminal class and maybe some similar demographic that I can't think of offhand. I think these Trump Republicans and Trump base voters are just among the sorriest lot this country has ever produced. And I think they're really bringing us in ruin. But the Democrats aren't helping anything. They're so feckless and disorganized.
Well, you know me, Eric. I've said this on the podcast before, is I think there will come a time when Americans are going to miss Trump. I do think that's going to... And that doesn't mean that Trump, if he got elected, could have saved us from this. But I think people are going to miss Trump. Just because the future is so uncertain now. And I hate to say it, Eric, but I get the impression... So you're elderly, and I think in your mind, you don't have to face the future. Like, that's going to come from this. And for me, I'm a little young. I'm not that young. I'm getting old. I have to live in this dystopian future.
Yes, you do, and
it's very concerning.
I don't envy you that. I mean, in a way, I find it fascinating. I'm fascinated by how things are unfolding here, and I am curious about how it's going to come out in the long run. Maybe it won't be as bad as I think.
Yeah,
that's possible.
I think it's going to be.
But I don't think. Well, you could be right. I don't think anybody is going to miss Trump who isn't already a Trump enthusiast.
Yeah.
And I think the historians will shred him, and I think they should.
Well, I'll tell you what, Eric. So we're approaching an hour.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let's end it with this. Here's the reason I focus. A lot of my videos focus on the youth because I made videos about technology impacting society, very Marshall McLuhan-esque. I made a video about TikTok, and I was unaware of TikTok or how it worked. And making that video, researching it, changed me because I realized that your generation, my generation, we're not going to matter soon because we're going to be phased out. These young people today, with the pride flag, the LGBT, the civil rights, I have no problems with any of that. What the problem I do have is that these young Marxist children, they're very boring. They're like robots. They talk about colonialism and white slavery or whatever, all that, and they're very. It's like kind of like the Hitler Youth. They targeted the children and probably in Russia, Soviet Union, I bet you the older generations that were anti-communist were outshadowed by the freaking communist children. So I think I'm very concerned that your generation is going to fade out. Mine is going to fade out. We're not going to matter. And I think we need to look up to people like you from your generation. We should shut up and listen. And that's one thing that the young don't do anymore.
That is for sure, and I really appreciate that, Brandon. And if I had to speak to American youth, I would say, shape up, you little maggots.
Yep.
Put the little sons through boot camp. Whatever. I don't. I think that would just probably, if anything, exacerbate their intransigence and their inability to cope with the real world.
Yes.
I think the youth are too far gone. But
that strict Christian upbringing you had, I think that children are yearning for that. I think they're starved for
that's.
Well, we do this for fun.
Yeah.
I have really I've always wanted to have a podcast that gets comments and has fans.
Yeah.
The world is not giving me any of that.
Nah.
So at this point, we got to do it for fun. Who are we?
Madmen of the cybersphere. Yes, indeed.
Have a good one.
Who else would we be?